That's it. Yeah. Well, it's good to see you. I know we have a lot of folks under the weather, and they're staying home because, they're congested and just out of consideration. And I appreciate that quite a bit. So thanks for being here today. We are going to conclude our series on biblical masculinity. The question today is, whatever happened to our heroes? When I was growing up, there was really only one man who was the hero who exhibited manhood in America. And his name was John Wayne, but a lot of times we just called him oh yeah. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, then moving pictures must be worth 1,000,000, because he had gigantic, humongous influence in America during his days as an actor. So why was the Duke such an icon of manliness in America? Was it because of his toughness or that absolutely identifiable swagger he had as he came in the scene? Partly. But even other manly types looked up to the Duke. And I think a lot of that is because, well, he was big and strong, but he never used that to bully. In fact, he used his strength to protect the weak, and that was one of the things you keep seeing over and over in his movies. This big, strong, masculine man is helping those who need help. And he was always the good guy, wasn't he? He refused to take parts where he was not the good guy. He always wanted to be in the right. My personal hero is Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm a preacher and I'm supposed to. I mean that. In fact, Jesus became my hero even before I became a Christian. I had never read the Bible, and so I didn't know anything about Jesus or the gospel or his stories or his teachings. I grew up in an unchurched home, and I myself was an atheist. But I got to a place where I realized that my life was miserable and I was going to need some big help. And in my 12-step meetings, they kept telling me, you need a higher power. And I had asked them who your higher power is, and they almost always said Jesus. So I eventually ended up with a Bible in a modern translation that I could understand, and I read the Gospel of Mark. And I was very impressed with Jesus. I mean, I was impressed with his words. I'd read a lot of philosophy at that time, and so the things that he was saying were pretty impressive, very impressive. I don't know if you ever read the Gospel of Mark, but, it's short and to the point, which is one thing I like about it. But you know what? Honestly, family, it wasn't the words that he said that had the greatest impact on me. It was his life. What I mean by that is I saw that he had a compassion for the downtrodden. That he was bothered that people were suffering, and he wanted to do something about that. And he had miraculous powers, and so if somebody had never walked in their life, he'd touch them and they'd go away dancing. It was awesome. But sometimes he just cared about people, even though there wasn't necessarily a miracle involved. And I was very drawn to that, and I still am. I know that after he resurrected and eventually he went back up to heaven to be at the right hand of God, where he is to this very day, his disciples carried on his mission, and they began to preach and teach, and they began to get into the same problems that Jesus had. The very same people that caused his crucifixion are unhappy with his disciples, his apostles they're called, and they're out there preaching and teaching and healing, and they don't want that, and so they got in trouble, and they pulled him again in front of the authorities of their day there in the temple. In Acts chapter 4 and verse 13, it says something very unique. You don't see this a lot. It says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. I think what changed these men, as much as his teaching and his doctrine and his truth, was his life. I mean, spending 3 years following him around Galilee and Judea and witnessing him, that's, I think, what really changed those apostles. God knows that the way that a man lives affects others, and he knows also that godly men teach other men how to live. And theologically speaking, the role of heroes is very important in the Bible. The Bible has a whole hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. It's almost like you're walking down one of those museums and you're seeing all those portraits on the wall, you know. And so the Bible highlights those who we call heroes of the faith. Historically speaking, the role of heroes is, well, it used to be important in America. This all has changed, hasn't it? Sadly. So what happened? Why doesn't America honor its heroes anymore? Well, a couple sweeping things happened in the 60s that changed everything in our landscape, especially in this topic. One of the ideologies that came out of our universities of the day is that no one really is in a position to tell you what is right or wrong. No one can definitively say that what you're doing is right or wrong, that anyone else has no right to tell you what you're doing is bad or what you're doing is good. And this is exceptionally popular among the younger generations. And therefore, with this philosophy also came this idea is that we didn't want a good role model. Because then I would be compared to that role model, and if I came up short on that, I'd feel bad about myself, and this whole self-image and self-improvement phase that came on in the 70s and 80s with a fury meant like, you don't have the right to make me feel bad. It's even worse now, isn't it? How many of you have a social media account? How many of you have seen people react instantly when somebody even infers that what they're doing may not be the best? You don't have that right. And we've taken this on so strong, and it's hurt us as a people. We're not stronger because we're so focused on our own image. The reason why we have so many societal problems is because we're no longer looking at Jesus as a hero at all. We're looking at ourselves. Another huge thing happened in the 60s that really reduced our look at heroes. It was called the Vietnam War. And we found out after all those years of conflict that the reason why we were over there wasn't as noble as we were told by our authorities and government. In fact, it caused a lot of people harm, and over 50,000 young men of our nation gave their life to that. Many of those men joined the military out of their sense of duty to this nation. But I don't know how many of you in this room served in Vietnam. I don't know how many of you know someone who served in Vietnam. But in my experience, and I'm just telling you from my perspective right now, that nearly every person I ever met who came out of Vietnam did not have a high estimation of the authorities in their lives. They felt betrayed. And they went into great detail about that. If you've been in a conversation like that, say, oh yeah. And so with that came another humongous thing. It could have been at the worst time, is when we were coming out of this conflict and finally the war's over and all that, and then Watergate. Watergate decimated our trust in our highest levels of government. And so those who used to have, whatever the government says is the right thing to do, and that disappeared in a very short, brief amount of time, to where even our respect for our own president was damaged, and still, I think, is in many ways. And so Americans went from accepting all authority to foolishly rejecting all authority. And now, after decades of these ideologies, our nation is paying a very harsh price. I was listening to Dennis Prager recently. He has a radio talk show in the mornings between 9 and noon. And the reason why I listen to him is, first of all, he's not a shock jock. He's not sitting there trying to, agitate people on purpose to draw ratings and all that. The other thing I love about him is he's the only person on talk radio that I know of that brings God and the Bible into the equation. He's a Jew, and he believes very firmly in his Bible and the God of his Bible, and he's very favorable, of course, to Christianity. But one of the things that he said that just really stuck out, I shut the radio off so I could remember what was happening, that wording. When you get my age, you got to do that, right? Turn off all the noise. I was in the car. I turned the radio off, and the reason why, he says, if you are a university student in the United States of America right now, what would cause you to have awe in anything? What do our university students have that would give them goosebumps of inspiration? Pretty quiet, isn't it? Are you guys as sad about that as I am? Because I knew what the answer was. Don't feel anything. Well, when I was younger, we had a lot of heroes, and a lot of good things happened because of that. And so we look carefully at our society, and we look carefully at the influences of our society, and we know, and we've already talked about that in the last couple of weeks, that masculinity is getting very confused in our culture. Walk across the college campus and you'll see what I mean. Look carefully at the entertainment industry. They're on an agenda. I don't know if you were here when Brad Harrod preached, but he did one of the best jobs of talking about this I've ever heard in all my 40 years of listening to preachers. He did an absolutely fantastic job of identifying why our boys are having a hard time understanding what it means to be a man of God. And he talked about the entertainment industry pushing an agenda, and one of those agendas is gender neutrality. This is a very deliberate thing on their part. And those who decide to broadcast the things that we're watching, whether it's streaming or cable or satellite, they're making those decisions. Those executives, those directors, those producers, those screenwriters, they're making decisions on what to write and how to write it. It's very, very deliberate. By the way, I remember about 20 years ago, they did a survey of all those in Hollywood that are in that category. Executive, producer, director, and writer. Less than 2% of them would call themselves a New Testament Christian. And so 98% of the people who are influencing your thoughts on that Technicolor high-def LED screen have an agenda. And I think it's time for the church to wake up and realize who it is that's informing them of the things that matter to God. One of the reasons for this series. You see, they deliberately have decided to portray an image of what manliness is. And for the most part, at least my observation is that on TV, men fall into two categories. They're either dunces or they're overbearing jerks who are sex crazed. That's pretty much where I see the two categories. They're either emasculated or they're heartless bullies. Now, long gone are the days, some of you have been around the planet a while, you know who those are, don't you? Can anybody tell me who the gentleman on the left is? What's the actor's name? Robert Young. Fathers knows best, okay? And then later on we had, Ben Cartwright, Lauren Green, right? What a great example of a father. A single father, by the way. Interesting. All right, some of you who are more younger than that, who's that on the right? What's his name in the character? Mr. C, because Cunningham's too long, of Happy Days. Long gone are these gentlemen on the screen. No, this is what we got now lately. Next slide. Al Bundy and Homer Simpson. The Simpsons is the longest running television program in the history of televised series. The Simpsons. I've only seen about 12 minutes of one episode. But you'll know why he's up there, because not necessarily the father figure you all want. Anybody pray to have a Homer at home? All right, anyway. Here's the newest trend. It's even more scary than that. And the next one is fathers are not even in the script anymore. They're being written out. Now, why would they do that? Why would absent fathers be so common in the programming as of late? Because they are in our world. Men are not in the homes of their children. You'll hear a lot about the reason why is because they're selfish and they were unhealthy to the family, and so, you know, it's their fault they're not there. What you won't hear is the other side of the coin of gentlemen that I've talked to who've left their families, and I've asked them why, and they said, because I was disrespected and denigrated by my own children and wife. My wife was treating me terrible and saying terrible things to me and about me. The kids heard it, picked it up, and then I got ganged on by all of them. And I don't know about you, sisters, but I'm telling you, a man ain't going to live in that. A man's not going to live in a house where he's been that disrespected. He's going to find somewhere else to go. Now, you're not going to read that in some U.S. News and World Report or Time Magazine article, but I'm going to tell you that's a reality. It's not all because men are weak. There have been some men who tried to fulfill their biblical role and got treated like that by those in the house that rebelled against that authority, that leadership. And so, my first real point today is that chivalry is not dead. Heroism is not dead. In 2012, a madman opened up he opened up and fired to an audience watching a late night showing of Batman, the movie, in Aurora, Colorado. He killed 12 people and injured 70 people. And we saw the news and all that stuff. How many of you remember hearing in that episode that 3 young men gave their lives because they were protecting their girlfriends from fire shot? Didn't know it, did you? Some of you heard that for the first time. How about Stoneman Douglas? You guys heard about that school shooting? Say yes. Did you know that Anthony Borges blocked the door to his classroom with his body and probably saved 20 lives, and that gunman shot through that door and he got hit 5 separate times and never stopped blocking the door? Now, you tell me, what causes a young man to have that kind of heroism? What taught those 3 young men in Colorado to cover their girlfriends with their bodies, to take the bullet themselves? You see, heroism is in America, but it's not popular. In the shooter, you have the picture of the worst kind of evil. But in these boys that I just mentioned, you have the opposite of evil, an expression of love expressed in protection. So I believe it's time for us in the church to remember the courageous and to celebrate that. I found out something fascinating. You know, well, first of all, you know I love words. You know, I love the background of words and where they came from and what they mean. How many times have you heard me break down a word in the Bible for you? Oh, here he goes. Wake up and listen to this. The word courage starts with C-O-R. C-O-R in Latin means heart. And it literally means strong-hearted. Oh, I like that. To be courageous means you have a strong heart. It doesn't mean you're fearless. It means that your heart compels you to do the right thing even though your circumstances scream at you not to. And in fact, I found a Bible verse in 2 Samuel 17:10. Then even the valiant men whose heart is like a heart of a lion. That's it. That's courage. And so what God is saying is that, you know, it's time to have a great heart, men. a strong heart to do the right thing. It's not the absence of fear. Every hero has had to go past that fear. And so if you listen to people today, everyday people today, who are not indoctrinated and by secular ideology, if you talk to people who don't spend their day listening to critics, boy, critics are so popular in our culture today. If you talk to people who aren't, influenced by all these negative, critical people who value balanced and wisdom and common sense, if you talk to people who are influenced by the Word of God, you'll see that chivalry isn't dead at all and that heroes still matter. And I want to close today with America's #1 all-time top hero and why he improved our world and what made that possible. And who I'm talking about is George Washington. Listen, when it comes to greatness in America, he's going to be hard to beat. I mean, our capital is named after him. We have a state up north named after him. If you've ever been to D.C., you can't miss that obelisk that climbs up into the sky as a memorial to this man. His birthday is a national holiday. Yay, another day off. But one thing I've noticed is that when you get heroes of this epic level, they stop being looked at like people. They're more like icons. Like they're so far removed from us, we can never even been close to that. And that's unfortunate because George Washington was a real, actual man with flaws, mistakes. This whole cherry tree thing doesn't hold up under historical scrutiny. Doesn't hold up. Not for its totality, maybe at the end of his life. But in his day, George Washington was the manliest man people probably ever saw. He was taller than most of the others, 6 foot, I think, 3. His picture is on the $1 bill. If you look at the picture on the $1 bill, you don't necessarily see a manly man. You see like a lacy shirt and a powdered wig, and that's why I picked this one. He's standing by his horse. Did you know that he had 5 horses shot out from underneath him during the Revolutionary War? Listen to me. You don't have to be, a hunter to know how close that is to your body. If you're on a horse and it gets shot out from underneath you, that brings about get smart. Missed it by that much, right? 5 times he was known to just go into battle. He never just, let everybody else do the work. He would just fearlessly, especially when he was young, he was very driven to be a powerful figure, a popular figure, and he was charging in to that fame and glory that so many young men do. But after the war was over, he resigned his commission, and he then turned all that passion into being a politician and being a landowner with a lot of wealth and property, and he married a woman who inherited Mount Vernon, and so he did become all those things. Well, no, I should say that he served in the army well before the Revolutionary War. Then he married Martha and was running for office and doing those kinds of things. And when the war came on, the Continental Congress got together to answer the question, who will lead this war? Who will lead this battle? He was the go-to for everyone. And so they called him in and they asked him to be the general of the army, and he said, I don't believe that I'm qualified to do that. So what had happened to this driven, I'm going to show for everybody that I'm the guy, to a point to where they've asked him to be the most important person in the nation for the next years, to battle the largest and most powerful army on earth. And he said, I don't believe that I'm qualified to do that. Where did that humility come from? By the way, he did accept. But if you're asking me to do that to serve my country, then I'll do that faithfully with everything I have and my capability. But he didn't think that he should have been the guy. So what happened? What turned this glory seeker into a modest and humble servant at 43 years old? It's called humility. Well, at the side of Washington, you're not going to hear in our textbooks or read in our textbooks or hear mostly in our classes, unfortunately. But Washington was a deeply devoted Christian. In fact, he served in his church as what they called back then a church warden, which was somebody who was visiting the sick and the poor and making sure that their needs were being met. His charity was known area-wide in Virginia. Mount Vernon became known for its hospitality, especially to the poor. During the war, Washington's nephew stumbled upon him accidentally peering into his tent during unannounced, and he witnessed his uncle, the general, kneeling on his knees with his Bible open, and he wrote in a journal, "I believe this is my uncle's daily practice." And if you read his writings, you cannot miss this principle: that national morality will be impossible without Christian principles. Now, he said that nearly 250 years ago. Do you think he was right still? So, I'm about to share with you something that I'm not sure how many of you even know this. It's the most epic action that he ever took in his life that marks him as the very first rank of all great men of history. In March of 1783, the war was over, and his officers and his soldiers held an undying devotion to George Washington because he was that heroic general. He was that leader. He was that victorious general. But these men found out from Congress that Congress was bankrupt and they were not going to receive their pensions as promised as serving during that conflict. Now, you can only imagine what a bunch of war-hardened guys who've been walking in snow for 4 years find out they're not going to get paid. What do you think all those officers decide to do? Like every other army does. They're going to do a coup. It's called a coup. They're going to go up and they're going to force their leader upon everybody else, and they began to make plans to install George Washington as king over America. And of course, Washington heard about it. It wasn't just one location, it was all over the nation. These officers coming together talking about making this plan. So Washington assembled all of his officers into one place, and he gave a speech that has changed our lives. When Washington learned about this, in this meeting, he gave a speech that basically shows that this man loved God and country. So the first thing he did was he declined the invitation to be crowned King George I of the United States. Then he appealed to their bravery in conquering the world's most powerful army, and he warned of tarnishing their well-deserved integrity and reputation among their peers by replacing one dictator with another. And then he left and went back to Virginia to be a farmer. When King George III in England had heard of Washington's decision to step down and not take this invitation to be king of America with his officers in charge, he said, and I quote, "This is the greatest man in the world." Because, listen, there's never been once a conquering general who has turned down becoming the leader of a nation afterwards. Not one. We can't find one in a similar situation who didn't say, "You're right, boys, it's ours for the taking." And so George Washington's decision, it still amazes. It came from his loyalty to Christ. It came from his love of his country. Oh, how we need a Washington in Washington right now. I am so sick of what I'm seeing in Washington, D.C. What I don't see is a Washington there. Putting everybody else's needs, suppressing their own, not pushing for a coup, not pushing for their will. We don't have men like this up there. And when Gallup surveys America, who gets the lowest marks of anybody in our society? Politicians and Congress. Nobody gets lower numbers than them. Brothers, we have so many men to look up to. So many men who are wonderful Christians, who are heroes. Some of them you may never have heard of. I don't know if you've ever heard of William Wilberforce, but he's the greatest force in abolishing slavery in the English-speaking world. He turned down an opportunity to be Prime Minister of England in order to further this quest of freeing people in England. And he succeeded. And he's probably the greatest reason why we had a civil war and eventually did the same. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but he jeopardized his life by defying the Nazis. You know how he did it? He quoted Scripture. He revealed God's Word in a time where all of his contemporaries, his peers, and all the other pastors and priests were caving into the Nazism of Germany. And he stood up and said, "We cannot do that. It is not of God." And they imprisoned him, and eventually they killed him. Jackie Robinson really, in many ways, conquered racism in the USA by following the guidance of his Christian mentor, his coach, but even more so, his wife. His wife said, "Don't fight for your rights. Be like Jesus and win over your enemies with humility and self-control." Now, there's a woman. Amen. Oh, man, Jackie Robinson would be nobody to us without that wife. But he had a coach, and his coach was an avid Bible student, and he said, "Jackie, don't fight for your freedom. Be humble. Be Christ-like." Did it work? Sure did. The last name I'll mention is one that may surprise you. His name is Charles Colson. Yeah, that Charles Colson. Yeah, Watergate Charles Colson. Yeah, went to prison after Watergate. While he was in prison, somebody gave him a Bible. When he got out of prison, he continued to read that Bible, and eventually he had what all of us call a come-to-Jesus moment. And he decided that God wanted him to improve life in prisons because he'd been there. And because of Christian prison ministry, countless inmates and even more of their wives and their families worldwide have been blessed because of Charles Colson. Charles Colson is one of the most read evangelical authors in the last 50 years. He's written some amazing, absolutely amazing books. I have my own heroes today. John W. Smith is my hero. He's been here a couple times to preach to you. I have a local hero. He's going to get really mad at me. He is absolutely not going to want me to say this, but I don't care. I don't care what Ray Nelson thinks about me calling him my hero. Within a month of moving to Turlock, I was living in his house, by the way. And one morning we were having coffee, and I said, "Ray, I can't wait to grow up and be like you." And I wasn't joking, because I love that man. That man reads the Bible with terrible eyesight. That man picks up his phone and calls people he hadn't seen or heard from. That man blows an out-of-tune harmonica on your birthday. I've asked Ray and Linda over and over in the 7 years I've been here, will you mind, could you, would you? And the answer is, I don't know, John, I don't know. I don't know. Ray, would you? And then he does it. We need heroes. Don't we young men need heroes? Aren't we blessed to have them in our church? We don't talk about that because, we don't want to give them a big head. We don't want to do that. We don't want to inflate them. We don't want them to be conceited. Stop talking like that. The Bible says honor those who are honorable. So stop doing that. Lift them up. If you got a great sister, lift her up. Because you know what? It's time. It's time for us to honor and celebrate the people that we have in this family who are honorable and Christian and strong and courageous and selfless and sacrificial. It's time for us to do that. It's okay to brag on people. And stop doing what the culture says. Well, we're all equal. Nobody's better than anybody else. Well, I've said it all. Do you have Jesus as your hero? Because if you do, you want to be like him. So the question, I guess, is, do you look like him? Are you acting like him? Jackie Robinson was. Chuck Colson was. George Washington was. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. Jesus changed all those men, and they've changed our world. They've improved our world. And I'm grateful that I know what a man of God looks like. Let's stand up. Stan's got a song for us. It'll probably even be on the screen. There it is. Oh, good. Whew.